Hey heroes, and welcome to another villainous episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an event of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Little is known of the early life and upbringing of the man now known as the Wizard. He was originally named Bentley Whitman, but exactly where he was born and the identity of his parents have thus far gone undocumented. An inventive genius, he earned multiple PhDs in various scientific fields, amassed a fortune by creating cutting-edge luxury items for wealthy customers, and operated out of a futuristic mansion of his own design, located on New York's Long Island. His scientific discoveries not only earned him the respect and admiration of his peers, but considerable fame as well. Soon, most knew him not as Bentley Whitman, but by his public alias, the Wizard. It was during this time that he met a mysterious superhuman woman known only as Salamandra. Even less is known about her origins, but she is referred to herself as the Dragon's Daughter, and demonstrated the ability to shapeshift into a draconic form. Some online have posited a connection between Salamandra and the Dragon Kings of Kunlun, and while this idea makes a certain amount of sense, it should nonetheless be considered pure speculation. Whitman and Salamandra came to a sort of agreement and married, however, this was neither a romantic nor a passionate affair. In fact, while their marriage was never consummated, Whitman artificially inseminated Salamandra against her will, keeping her restrained and sedated for months, all in the hopes of producing his own superhuman offspring. However, when his genetic testing showed no signs of superhuman potential in the unborn child, he lost interest in the whole affair and released his pregnant wife, bringing their disturbing marriage to an abrupt end. Over the following years, Whitman continued to foster his public persona, even legally changing his name to the Wizard. He made numerous public appearances, showing off his intellect and his skill at the game of chess. He also demonstrated feats of stage magic and escape artistry that were only possible through the use of miniature devices of his own design. However, his fame began to wane with the dawn of the Marvel Age, when the number of costumed superhumans suddenly began to dramatically increase. This all kicked off with the public debut of the Fantastic Four, the leader of which, Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, was widely considered to be the smartest man in the world. Furthermore, the team's youngest member, Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, performed feats of daring and heroism annoyingly close to the Wizard's home, as they both lived on Long Island. As a side note, while the Fantastic Four as a group were indeed headquartered in the Baxter Building in Manhattan, Johnny maintained a residence in his hometown of Glenville, Long Island, while he was still attending high school there. He even attempted to keep his true identity a secret during this time, but that ended in the funniest way possible when he learned that everybody in town already knew exactly who he was. Anyway, between the Torch's proximity and his growing fame, the Wizard swiftly took notice, and resolved to defeat him. He justified this to himself by declaring that the Torch would be a worthy challenge, but in truth the Wizard was primarily motivated by jealousy and a vain self-obsession. He initially lured the Torch into a meeting by staging an accident in which he was seemingly trapped underground while demonstrating a new drilling machine. Sure enough, the Human Torch saved his life, and familiar with the Wizard's public persona, gladly agreed to visit his futuristic mansion. Once there, the Wizard doused the Torch's flame and trapped him before donning a costume of his own design to emulate the young hero's fiery superpowers and impersonate him. The phony Torch then went on a crime spree, with acts ranging from vandalism to bank robberies to prison breaks. However, the Wizard underestimated just how powerful the real Torch was, and before long Johnny was able to escape by burning through the wall of his cell. In his arrogance, the Wizard prepared photographic evidence that proved the young hero's innocence and challenged him to a fair fight, threatening to destroy the photos if the Torch didn't flame off and reveal himself. However, the Human Torch declared that he had powers the wizard didn't even suspect, and simply caused the evidence to fly out of the wizard's hands and into his own. Completely bamboozled and thoroughly defeated, the wizard was sent to prison for his crimes, while the Torch's reputation was saved. As for the invisible power that allowed him to claim the evidence, well, if you haven't figured it out yet, after escaping from the wizard's trap, Johnny called his older sister, Susan Storm, the Invisible Girl, who silently intervened. Of course, the wizard swore revenge on the Torch and soon began plotting his escape. After earning the trust of the warden, the wizard gained access to the prison hospital, allowing him to create a chemical concoction capable of burning a hole in the prison wall. This time he briefly succeeded in trapping both Johnny and Susan Storm, but they soon escaped and defeated him once again, further increasing his ire. The next time he escaped, it was with the help of another enemy of the Torch, Peter Petruski, aka Paste Pot Pete. While his moniker didn't exactly strike fear into the hearts of his foes, Peter did have an impressive grasp of chemistry, particularly when it came to adhesives, which is what led him to develop his signature paste gun. Of course, even together, he and the wizard were soon defeated by the Torch yet again. In another instance, the wizard orchestrated disasters across New York City while broadcasting clues to his targets and challenging the Torch to decipher them. However, this scheme also caught the attention of the masked vigilante Spider-Man, and together the two young heroes tracked down and defeated the wizard once again. While his reputation was thoroughly tarnished, the wizard always managed to escape from prison thanks to a remarkable ability to devise high-tech gadgets and chemical concoctions using whatever materials he could get his hands on. Of course, it's also because this was very early in the Marvel Age, before the authorities had adapted to better hold supervillains of his ilk. At some point in these early years, Bentley Whitman also met a man named Alicia, who was actually something called an alpha primitive. I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but the short version is that the alpha primitives were a slave race created to serve the Inhumans, a superpowered offshoot of humanity that lived in the hidden city of Atlantis. While it was illegal in Inhuman culture for alpha primitives to be educated, Alicia nonetheless learned to read, escaped from Atlantis, and even graduated from Empire State University in New York. Wanting to free the rest of his kind, he approached the wizard and obtained from him power-inhibiting technology, which was then used in an attack on the Inhuman king of the time, but ultimately failed to bring his reign to an end. After that, Alicia recruited 3 young Inhuman royals, Medusa, Black Bolt, and Maximus, taking them to meet Bentley Whitman, who claimed that he wanted to protect humanity from the potential threat posed by the corrupt Inhuman king. Of course, the wizard secretly plotted to conquer Atlantis for himself, but this scheme came to an abrupt end when Alicia tased him and stole his technology. Alicia attempted to use the wizard's machines to seize control of the slave engine, which is a device that transformed regular humans into alpha primitives. Alicia's end goal was to use a code written by the wizard to reprogram the slave engine so that it would instead rob every Inhuman of their powers. However, Black Bolt and the other young royals opposed this, and he ultimately failed. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the complicated history of the Inhumans in this video, but I will note that the corrupt king was overthrown by Black Bolt sometime after that, and his name was stricken from all historical records, causing him to henceforth be referred to only as the Unspoken. However, Black Bolt's brother Maximus the Mad soon staged his own coup by causing another alpha primitive revolt. The important thing for today is that in the resulting battle, Medusa's flying vehicle crashed outside of Atlantis and she was left amnesiac. She ultimately took refuge on an island in the Mediterranean, but we'll come back to Medusa shortly. In the meantime, the wizard continued to be a menace as he developed what would quickly become his most famous weapons, his signature anti-gravity discs. As the name implies, these devices nullify the effect of gravity on anything they are affixed to, allowing him to levitate himself and other objects. However, in his next encounter with the Human Torch, one of his discs malfunctioned, and he nearly floated off into space. That might have been the end of the Wizard then and there had he not been spotted by his ally, Paste Pot Pete, and another criminal, William Baker, aka Flint Marco, aka the Sandman, who just so happened to have hijacked a small airplane after escaping from prison together. Pete and the Sandman rescued the Wizard, and the threesome decided to form a group that could rival even the Fantastic Four. Seeking to round out the team with a female member, the Wizard tracked down the amnesiac Medusa and recruited her as well. Thus was born the first incarnation of the infamous criminal quartet, the Frightful Four. With his anti-gravity suit allowing him to fly, Bentley Whitman began referring to himself as the Wingless Wizard. The Frightful Four soon began launching attacks on their heroic counterparts, nearly succeeding in 2 of these attempts and evading capture both times. It was in between those 2 battles that Paste Pot Pete finally updated his gear as well as his moniker, becoming known as the Trapster. The Frightful Four even did surprisingly well in a battle against the Avengers, but then again this was right after the legendary team's first major roster change, when its founding members all took simultaneous leaves of absence, while Captain America remained to lead their new recruits, forming a version of the team that has been informally referred to as Cap's Kooky Quartet. The Avengers did subsequently defeat the Frightful Four in a rematch, but the villains evaded capture yet again. I should note that this second battle was affected by the presence of a superhuman woman named Cressida, aka Avenger X, who had the ability to boost the power of other superhumans by draining the life force of innocent bystanders. In the aftermath of all that, Cressida was found and attacked by the Wizard, the Sandman, and the Trapster, who defeated her and effectively buried her alive, sealing her in a glue-filled pit and covering it with a large boulder. Suffice it to say, while the Wizard might not have the best track record in terms of villainy, his pettiness and capacity for malice should not be underestimated. Nor should his inventive genius, really, because around this time he also created a device called the id Machine, which could alter a person's personality. He used this invention on Ben Grimm, the Thing, causing him to fight alongside the Frightful Four. However, Ben was ultimately restored to normal, and this time the Wizard, the Trapster, and the Sandman were all apprehended once again. Medusa, meanwhile, escaped, and after a chance encounter with the X-Men, learned that the Wizard had planted a device on her neck that prevented her memory from recovering and affected her personality. Soon escaping again and tracking this device, the Wizard attempted to force her to continue serving him, but this time he was defeated by the X-Men, who freed Medusa from his control. Thanks to this, she eventually regained her memory and rejoined her fellow Inhumans in Atlantis. The Wizard also briefly joined forces with Mysterio in an attempt to defeat Spider-Man and the Human Torch, and subsequently launched solo attacks on the Fantastic Four, but success continued to remain beyond his grasp. In another incident, he and the Trapster teamed up with the armored villain the Beetle, but met with a humiliating defeat when Susan Storm used her powers to turn their trousers invisible one by one, distracting each villain just long enough for Spider-Man and the Human Torch to take them down with ease. At one point, while raising funds to restart the Frightful Four, he even sold weapons and technology to the notorious white supremacist group, the Sons of the Serpent, who at the time were calling themselves the Sons of the Shield in an attempt to co-opt the symbol of Captain America. In any event, while the Wizard didn't exactly share or even care about the organization's racist goals, he further proved his lack of scruples through his willingness to work for them for the right price. A bit of a side note here, but the leader of the Sons at the time, John Mason, clad himself in a costume similar to the Wizard's and ultimately plotted to exterminate the African American population using something he called a bioethnic virus that was apparently designed to only affect black people. Unsurprisingly, that didn't work, and Mason was ultimately killed by his own virus, which, of course, was equally deadly regardless of skin color, but we're getting off track. If we were to go into detail about all of the Wizard's dealings and defeats, we'd be here all day. So now let's focus on his many attempts to re-establish the Frightful Four. He initially made attempts to bring Medusa back into the fold to maintain the group's original roster, however she consistently turned against him and sided with the Fantastic Four, forcing the Wizard to abandon the idea. That kicked off what would turn out to be a lengthy search for a suitable replacement. In one instance, they recruited Blastaar, a warlord from the Negative Zone who'd previously allied himself with the Sandman. However, that didn't work out since the alien menace was too proud to be controlled and turned on his teammates with the slightest provocation. The Wizard next attempted to brainwash Spider-Man into joining him, forcing the hero to battle the Human Torch, but Spidey ultimately broke free from his control and turned against him. Next, he recruited Thundra, a superhuman warrior woman from an alternate future timeline who sought to battle the world's most powerful men. The Wizard promised her such targets, in particular sending her against the Thing, but while Thundra lusted for battle, she had no intention of actually killing her opponents, and ultimately left the Frightful Four when she realized their enemies were far more noble than they. In one incident, the core trio of Wizard, Sandman, and Trapster actually succeeded in taking over the Baxter Building while the Fantastic Four were away on another mission, and even managed to defeat and capture the heroes upon their return. After that, they placed a want ad and began interviewing applicants for the empty spot on the team. Most of those who showed up were people like Oscar Kincaid Jr., aka the Osprey, who had no experience or abilities but hoped the Wizard could grant him superpowers. Suffice it to say, the Wizard rejected this request and sent Kincaid floating away with an anti-gravity disc programmed to set him down in the South Bronx. As a side note, while the Osprey has never been seen or heard of again, the Player's Book for a Marvel Superheroes role-playing game uses him as an example in character creation, positing that he could have kept the anti-gravity disc and reworked it to create his own flying device. I mean, the book itself clarifies that this isn't official canon, but still, how's that for an obscure reference? Other applicants included the Texas Twister, who could create and control whirlwinds and tornadoes. Real name Drew Daniels, he obtained this ability several weeks prior when he was hit by a radioactive tornado. That's not a joke, by the way, that's canonically what happened. He hoped to profit from his abilities, but when he found out that the Frightful Four weren't offering a salary, he left to join up with S.H.I.E.L.D. instead. Thundra also showed up in the middle of this and attempted to free the Fantastic Four, but this time she was defeated by her former teammates. One seemingly promising applicant was the colorful Captain Ultra, who had a variety of abilities including super strength and flight. However, he also had a severe fear of fire that caused him to pass out upon even seeing an open flame, making him virtually useless in a group that regularly clashed with the Human Torch. This whole farce finally started coming to an end when the cat-like adventurer Tigra arrived and briefly succeeded in freeing the Thing and the Torch, causing most of the other applicants to flee. However, the heroes were captured again when the Frightful Four were aided by the final remaining applicant, the Brute, who was actually an alternate version of Reed Richards from the High Evolutionaries' Counter-Earth. Long story short, the armored geneticist known as the High Evolutionary once attempted to create a more peaceful duplicate of Earth on the opposite side of the solar system. However, his rogue creation, the Man-Beast, interfered with the process, resulting in a counter-Earth where evil still existed, but superheroes did not. This even included duplicates of figures from the original Earth like Reed Richards, who lived similar lives, but on Counter-Earth he and his friends never became the Fantastic Four, and the accident where they otherwise would have left Susan Storm in a permanent coma. Furthermore, because of the Man-Beast's meddling, Counter-Reed was unaffected by the cosmic rays until years later, when he suddenly and unexpectedly transformed into a hulking brute. There's more to that story, of course, but for now we'll just point out that he eventually made his way to the original Earth, where he joined the Frightful Four. In the end, however, the Fantastic Four and their allies broke free and defeated their villainous counterparts, with the Brute seemingly being banished into the negative zone. In actuality, the Brute secretly traded places with the original Reed, but you can check out my video on the negative zone itself for how that got resolved. The important thing for today is that even after all that effort, the so-called Frightful Four still only had 3 regular members. They tried recruiting Electro and striking at both Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. This attempt ended in defeat, and their shocking new recruit didn't stick around for another. Their next recruit was the aquatic criminal Lyra Morris, who'd previously clashed with Namor, the Sub-Mariner. Like Namor, Lyra was a hybrid who could breathe both underwater and on land, but she was descended from the green-scaled Lemurian race, which diverged from the Atlanteans and worshipped the elder god Set. As you can imagine, there's a lot more to that story as well, but Lyra didn't stay with the Frightful Four long, quitting after the team was defeated by Spider-Man and the Sub-Mariner. On top of that, the group soon lost another member when the Sandman started turning away from crime in an attempt to reform. Starting from scratch, the Wizard tried hiring mercenaries to build a new Frightful Four, specifically recruiting Taskmaster, Constrictor, and Deadpool. Suffice it to say that incarnation of the team did not last very long. For the next attempt, the Wizard recruited Claw, Hydro-Man, and Titania. Ulysses Claw was a regular foe to the Black Panther and the Fantastic Four, whose entire body was converted into solidified living sound, endowing him with a variety of sonic powers. Morris Bench, aka Hydro-Man, was an emotionally unstable criminal who could transform into living water and previously clashed with Spider-Man. Mary McFerrin, aka Titania, was a woman with super strength and a chip on her shoulder, but we talked about her on the channel before, so check the link in the description for more. With these decently powerful allies, the Wizard did decently well in his next confrontation with the Fantastic Four. He even attempted to forge an alliance with a rogue watcher named Aaron, but that backfired when Aaron decided that he had his own plans for the FF and swiftly defeated the Frightful Four, holding them captive until ultimately sending them directly to a maximum security prison for superhumans, the Vault. Next, the Wizard brought the Trapster back and recruited the Dread Knight and the Man Bull. The Dread Knight was a former Latvian scientist named Bram Velsing, who previously clashed with Iron Man. His story involves members of the Frankenstein family as well as the notorious monster itself, so we really ought to talk more about him someday. The Man-Bull, meanwhile, was a career criminal named William Torrens who was transformed by an experimental strength-enhancing formula that used mutated bull enzymes. This short-lived version of the team launched an attack on an annual Canadian festival, the Calgary Stampede, but were opposed by a visiting superhero team from Texas, the Rangers, which included the Phantom Rider, Shooting Star, and of course, Texas Twister. Also, Spider-Man was there. For the next version of the team, the Wizard brought back Ulysses Claw, but not the Trapster. This time he recruited Sharon Ventura, who had previously operated as Ms. Marvel, but during this time had mutated into an increasingly grotesque she-thing. The Wizard also recruited another long-standing enemy of the Fantastic Four, Ivan Kragov, aka the Red Ghost, an old Soviet scientist who possessed intangibility powers and could command a trio of superhuman simians. We already talked about both Sharon and the Red Ghost in their own videos, so links in the description, you know the drill. After that version of the team was defeated, the Wizard attempted to reunite the core members of the Frightful Four by abducting the Sandman and using the id Machine to revert him back to his earlier villainous self. While this did indeed bring the Sandman's violent tendencies to the surface once more, he immediately turned on the Wizard and refused to be his pawn. For the next version of the team, he brought back former members, Trapster and She-Thing, this time rounding out the roster by reprogramming one of Galactus's Punisher robots, which are unrelated to the lethal vigilante of the same name. After that Punisher was rendered inoperable and She-Thing left the team, the Wizard and the Trapster were joined by another former member, Hydro-Man, as well as Whitman's estranged ex-wife, Salamandra. The Wizard also attempted to recruit his now 19-year-old daughter Cole after she developed mass-shifting abilities and even banished Trapster into a temporal loop when he threatened Cole, at least in part because he vainly wanted to keep the group at 4 members. Suffice it to say that version of the team didn't last very long, but the villains ultimately escaped and Cole Whitman hasn't been seen since. Okay, this is starting to go long, so let's finish off by rattling off the remaining rosters for subsequent versions of the Frightful Four, some of which were made up primarily of former members. For example, the next incarnation of the team consisted of the Wizard, the Trapster, Hydro-Man, and Titania. During this time, Whitman also restored Ulysses Claw using a sound sample that he downloaded from BitTorrent, bringing him back into the fold. The next version of the team still included Claw and Trapster, and was rounded out by a new member, the She-Hulk Lyra, who was actually a daughter of the former Frightful Four member, Thundra. Another incarnation included the Wizard, Claw, Hydro-Man, and a female version of the Trapster, though I'm pretty sure this comes from a free pack-in comic that was included with a cookie cutter set or something, so who even knows how canon this one is. For what it's worth, a female Trapster did legitimately show up later, but I don't know if it's the same person. I'm getting off track again. In another incarnation of the team, the Wizard hypnotized Medusa into joining once again, recruited another former member, Blastaar, and forced his wayward clone, Bentley 23, to join him as well. Long story short, the Wizard created artificially aged clones of himself while he was suffering from brain cancer. However, the prepubescent Bentley 23 was rescued by Reed Richards and joined his Future Foundation. For the next version of the team, the Wizard once again recruited Claw and used his sonic powers to steal the Carnage symbiote from Cletus Cassidy, forcibly bonding it to the Mad Doctor, Carl Malice, transforming him into a superior Carnage, as Whitman described it, who I suppose counts as 2 in this case. In any event, you can read the Superior Carnage miniseries for more details. For the next version of the team, the Wizard recruited the mystically empowered superhumans Thunderball and the Wrecker, who are traditionally key members of their own group, the Wrecking Crew, who we've also talked about on the channel before. The 4th member this time was Marcy Kemp, the daughter of another Wrecking Crew regular, Bulldozer. Weirdly enough, the next incarnation of the Frightful Four was also composed of superhumans primarily known for another group, as this time he recruited 3 members of the Salem's 7, Reptilla, Gazelle, and Vertigo. Once again, long story short, all 3 of these women were the children of the notorious warlock Nicholas Scratch, and the granddaughter of the witch Agatha Harkness. And funnily enough, the last time that the Wizard assembled a Frightful Four, it wasn't to attack his enemies, but to help defend humanity from a global invasion orchestrated by a villain known as the Quiet Man. To this end, he recruited former allies with the capacity for heroism, including Sandman, Thundra, and She-Thing, and helped the Fantastic Four fight off corrupted duplicates of the Avengers from Franklin Richards' Pocket Dimension. The one that he created in the aftermath of the Onslaught incident. Long story, we've mentioned it on the channel before. For once, the Frightful Four actually got to be pretty fantastic. Anyway, that's all I've got for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here. But Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!